seated. Good morning. Good morning. Oh, that's so nice. How are you? Good to see you. Good to see you. Where are you at? Where are you at? I want to see more. Like, let's see. Where are you at? Where are you at? Okay. Oh, 2 thumbs up. Okay, that's great. First of all, what I want to mention is prefects did an outstanding job getting everybody in and asking people to be quiet, and you were outstanding in responding to that, and you were nice and quiet, and I think that's a really nice way to come into this space, so thank you very much. Thank you. All right, as we gather for chapel today, I want us to take a moment to reflect on the significance of customs and traditions, both within QMS and within our own lives. Customs and traditions help shape who we are. They connect us to our communities, and they remind us of the values we hold. And the reason why we're focusing on this is we're entering, as we enter December, or I guess we're in December, a lot of people are starting to think about the holidays and how they celebrate the holidays and different holidays. And it's also just some time away from school and a break from regular routine. So I think it's a nice time to focus on this. Here at QMS, we have many traditions that help define our community. One example within chapel is our Christmas carol service, a long-standing tradition that brings us together each year right before the holidays. It is a moment many look forward to, and it is an important part of our shared story as a school. At the same time, many in our community celebrate other customs and traditions during the season, such as Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, and others that hold deep meaning for their families. It's important that our chapel remains a space where all traditions can be acknowledged, respected, and welcomed. When we learn from one another in this way, we strengthen our sense of belonging and deepen our understanding of the diverse community we are part of. As we move through this month's gatherings, I invite you to think about the traditions that matter to you and to be open to learning about the traditions that matter to the people around you. This openness enriches our community and helps us honor the many ways meaning and celebration are expressed in our lives. And now I welcome Mr. Monroe to share a few things about his own customs and traditions.
From a young age, I spent a lot of time in my kilt. On Sundays, I'd wear it to church with my Lovat-Hose socks, my leather sporran, and my kilt jacket. And when we had an away fixture at another school, we had to put it all on again. I remember it being itchy and heavy, and it felt like it took me 15 minutes to hang it all up at the end on a coat hanger at the end of the day. There were moments when I hated my kilt. But I'd rather have worn shorts. But there were other times when I looked at it and muttered, "You complete me." It made me feel like William Wallace in the movie Braveheart, and that was before the movie was even made. In 1990, when I went to watch Scotland play England at Murrayfield, the home of Scottish rugby, I felt an almost fraternal connection to my kilted brethren, like we had a bond forged through some imaginary shared hardship. At the end of the match, I wandered onto the field, deeply moved by the occasion and inspired by the performances. I bent down, plucked some grass, and put it in my sporran, vowing one day to play for Scotland. Every winter break, we would attend Scottish country dances. Families would organise a party of people, with one of them hosting dinner at their house. Everyone was fully kilted and dressed to the nines in their black tie, which is the tuxedo version of the kilt dress. At the end of the meal, you'd then take your dance card, which had all the dances listed down the left-hand side, and you'd have to go around booking the girls in for particular dances until your card was full. Then we'd head to the venue, which was sometimes at a smart hotel and other times in a ballroom at a Scottish castle, and dance the night away into the early hours of the morning, with kilts swishing and people whooping and hollering through the Scottish reels. I peeked into Founders Hall yesterday and saw a grade 10 class performing a reel called Strip the Willow. Almost everyone had a smile on their face, and because of the organised nature of Scottish reels, it removes that self-critical voice of, "Oh, well, I'm not a great dancer," because everyone can learn the form and structure of the dances, and you don't have to rely on the freestyle nature that most school dances invite. One of my favourite memories of Scottish reeling was in Italy at a special ball in one of the few remaining private palaces in Venice. We took gondolas through the city canals and climbed out into the front entrance of the palace. Side note, in Venice, traditionally the front entrances to houses are from the water. There are so many customs and traditions I recall from growing up in Scotland, and given wartime, I share memories of New Year's, golfing, and Highland military tattoos. Even the nature of Scottish humour, which is very self-deprecating. I mean, if you took yourself too seriously or did something really well, it wouldn't be long before your friends would take you down a notch or two. It was very important in Scotland, to keep your feet on the ground, especially when wearing a kilt. Moving to Canada shifted me from a proximity to many of these customs and traditions, yet the longer we lingered here, the more I saw them showing up in the behaviours and in the cultural landscape around me. Some of the best bagpipers in the world, for example, are Canadian, and you can source haggis from many butchers when Burns night comes around. That's a tribute to the famous Scottish poet who wrote A Red, Red Rose. Scottish Highland dance is such a valid and valued activity to engage in on Vancouver Island, and the list goes on. Customs, which are ways of behaving associated with particular societies or cultures or time, can be seen as living things. Sometimes when I reflect on my experiences as a boy, I assume they'll be the same for today's younger generation who attend the same functions. However, given I'm still receiving the invites to many of these events, I see the changes that have occurred in things like expectations of what people wear. More casual, if you're interested to know. And we see that reflected in things like our uniform here. It's a sort of moving with the times. Even though that's a small thing, it's a nuanced difference that affects the atmosphere and feel of an event. And while the reel of the 51st is one of my favourite Scottish reels, there's an Aberdonian version, which was an offshoot of, and a tweaked version of the original. So customs evolve over time, even in older, more traditional societies. One thing I noticed when I moved to Victoria in 2009 was that people would start up a conversation with you at a bus stop, for example, even if they didn't know you. And that, for me, was different and strange. I remember sitting at a bus stop in Cordova Bay, and I could tell the person next to me was talking, and I just thought, that's fine, sometimes people do talk to themselves, I do that sometimes as well. And it took me a minute or two to realise they were actually trying to start a conversation and have an interaction. So we then chatted for about 5 minutes or so before a bus came along and she got up and got on it. That developed over time such that when I next went back to the UK, I was playing golf with my brothers, and I went into the Golf Pro shop to buy a few balls and get a new glove and that kind of thing. And I just struck up a conversation with the woman who was working there. And after about 5 minutes or so, I dropped my things and I wished her a good day. And I turned around and both my brothers were looking at me sort of quizzically, waiting for me with this sort of look on their face. And they were like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean? I'm just talking to someone." I was like, they're a person. And they were just like, "Come on, that's it." And I thought, that's part of the reason why I really enjoy being here in Canada too. So this more open way of communicating is part of a culture that's trying to be inclusive, and one that's less affected by the class divides that exist in the UK. I know it's more complex than that, but I see those elements as key factors. I mentioned at the start how I used to wear my kilt to church, and while I was raised in a Protestant family and attended church every weekend, chapel 3 or 4 times a week at school, and had evening Bible and prayer sessions at my prep school in Edinburgh, I'm not a practicing Christian today. I'm familiar with many of the rituals, and our family participates in the traditions of the Christian faith, such as Christmas and Easter. Since my time on Vancouver Island, I've experienced a Muslim funeral, a secular wedding, and a series of First Nations rituals, songs, and dances, to name a few. What I've experienced is considerable overlap in themes and values. The desire to treat others kindly and with respect, the commitment to serve another person and to be a light in their lives, the use of song to unite groups of people and to tell stories that matter, and which represent figures and symbols from their culture. I have to say, I benefited immensely from this exposure and from the experiences and themes represented through a different medium. The question of customs and traditions in Canada is a complex and fascinating one. We're considered a young country, although, as we know, the maple leaf flag is laid down upon some of the oldest rocks on Earth, which have been inhabited for millennia by its indigenous population. We struggle with which traditions to celebrate because we're dealing simultaneously with colonial legacies, indigenous reconciliation, and rapidly growing diversity and immigration. Through all of this, we're trying to be fair and inclusive. We're trying to greet everyone at the bus stop, yet at the same time, trying not to offend them or make them uncomfortable. It takes time to build because traditions spread like languages or technologies, and people have to decide what feels meaningful, useful, and identity building, and let the other pieces go. Mrs. Powell told us about her Jewish roots and that this element of our identity was not represented through many of the symbols in this chapel. And so she looked to include something that evolved this space, because when we're part of a community, we look for things that represent us so that we can gain a greater sense of belonging. QMS has shifted from its traditional use of this space, and we've let go of the stronger Christian practices that occurred 4 or 5 times a week, and we've adopted a values-based approach that's hopefully more accessible to all. Will there still be hallmarks of Christianity or the traditions of the Christian faith introduced? Absolutely. Is there room to include rituals and understandings from other faiths? Absolutely. Do many people notice when festivals and celebrations from one culture are emphasized ahead of another? Absolutely. We'll continue to grapple with this at QMS as we recognize the complexities of traditions and customs as living entities, as we recognize the attachment to the familiar customs that many families have and the stability that comes with that, as we understand the elements that exclude others of who we are as we understand the elements that exclude others, and as we seek to find our way forward, maintaining the core elements of who we are as a school, but remaining open-minded to the fact that identity does evolve over time. When I was in my teens, we were attending midnight mass at St. John's Church in Forres, a place in which I was both baptized and married, 25 years apart, of course. We were still sitting upstairs in the balcony section, and I recall my godfather crafting a paper aeroplane from his service sheet at the end of the service and sending it over the balcony. It swooped and glided and made its way halfway down the congregation. We glanced over, amazed, my brothers and I, that he'd done that. He looked at us, raised his eyebrows, shrugged, smiled, and then winked. Within seconds, we were all folding our service sheets and crafting flying machines. I love singing hymns and Christmas songs, and even though I'm not a practicing Christian, the feeling of Christmas always comes through, and what that means for me is family. The smell of a tree, the anticipation of delicious food, usually eaten with friends, and the opportunity to pause and reflect on what's important in life. None of those elements in and of themselves can be claimed by any one religion, and every family will have their own nuanced version of the traditions surrounding this time of year and during the times of other cultural and religious festivals, whether you belong to another faith or to no faith at all. Thank you for listening, and I hope there's been something in this presentation that's promoted reflection. For now though, we're going to join in singing a Christmas favourite.